Hi, welcome to the Sifu Mimi Chan Show. Thanks for joining the conversation. Happy 50th birthday to hip hop! As a hip hop fan, I'm excited to welcome Oscar and Jason Chu on the show to discuss hip hop culture. We dive into all of the reasons hip hop is meaningful to us and relive some of the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s nostalgia. Does music change or do we? Honored to share in this conversation with Jason and Oscar as we dedicate this episode to the love of hip hop. Chinese-American rapper Jason Chu has been traveling across the USA spreading positivity and awareness for the AAPI community. He is known for his high-energy live performances that blend introspective lyricism with crowd-moving passion. On a mission to speak hope and healing in a broken world, his songs and videos tell stories of youth, family, and history. Please check out his work on jasonchumusic.com. For those that don't already know, Oscar Agramonte is my amazing and adoring husband. He is also a hip-hop expert, so naturally I had to have him in this conversation. My favor, as usual, is to please continue to share this podcast with others. It would also mean so much if you would rate it and leave me feedback. If you would like to help keep this podcast going and support the work I do, please visit my website or patreon.com/SifuMimiChan to become a patron of the show or make a one-time donation. For comments or suggestions, reach out on social media at SifuMimiChan. Now, on with the show. Hello, Jason and Oscar.
Hey.
All right, so just a month ago or so, we were all in Florida, in Miami, down on South Beach, at the beach, hanging out together, and it was epic. It was super epic.
So fun.
It was super hot, too.
That's what I was going to say. I was going to talk more about the heat and the great performance by Jason right here. It was really good.
Oh, man, thank you. No, it was such an honor to be with y'all, especially, like we've been friends for some time. We reconnected, maybe a year and a half ago, 2 years ago. Yeah. And then it was great to see y'all in person, but it was also really great to see your team at Make Us Visible Florida, because the work y'all been doing has really been resonating nationwide.
Thank you so much. So much. And just as a huge fan of yours, but also we had, it was a intimate setting, but we had such enthusiastic audience members. We had high schoolers that were just gushing over your performance and like just so cool. He's out from LA here to perform for us, but it was so special to have you as the finale. Not just because of the love of hip hop that like Oscar and I share, and that just kind of ties into advocacy, but just because you've been such a supporter of our journey. So it was epic. We were so thrilled. And to see you perform live, I can tell you, we always talk about the fact that we can hear songs on the radio, we can hear music, but there is nothing like that live performance, like your energy and your spirit, and just like, oh my God, it was amazing. So thank you again. And my team just cannot stop talking about it. So.
Oh man, that makes me super happy. Let them know anything that we can do. I'm happy to come back. I'm more than happy to come back to Florida. That was really good times.
Well, this conversation is twofold. One is, of course, hip hop's turned 50, happy birthday and all that. But you and Oscar, especially, kind of was sharing a bond. We were in the car going from place to place because, of course, we're in Miami. We had to go eat. We had to go get some good food. And
hell yeah.
Of course, there's some jams are coming up. And then I loved it. You guys just started kind of having the conversation. And I said, I wish I was just recording this right now for a podcast, because I just find it not just fascinating, but as a hip hop, fan and someone who grew up with it, like I just love hearing people who know a lot more about it than I do kind of talk about it in depth. And so I was kind of like, hey, let's make this a real episode and actually invite you both on to share in the conversation and just have some fun.
Yeah, I was just there picking your brain, because you're the actual professional. I have always just been a listener. And I've also, been a lyricist, but only in my car by myself with the actual music playing and me, rapping along with it.
Yes. Yeah,
but I mean, I actually think that informed, passionate, educated fans are an underrated contributor to the culture. And I think that this is something that we've seen as hip hop has gone from this thing when we were growing up, right? It was a very, very underground subculture. It was something that if you knew, you knew. And if you didn't know, you didn't even know where to seek it out. You didn't know who the artists were. You didn't even know, like whether that was graffiti or breakdancing, b-boying, b-girling, or rap music, DJing. Like, you didn't even know where to go to find it. And I think something that we've seen, right? Obviously, I love the fact that hip hop has become so mainstream because it means a lot of creators can make a living, a sustainable living off of the art. But also another piece of it means just because somebody nowadays listens to hip hop, nowadays, just because they like a rapper or they dress a certain way, that doesn't mean that they actually know the history of the culture. Or honestly, there's a lot of people who listen to rappers these days that I probably don't have a lot in common with because it's so big now.
Yeah.
And I think that was something that was really cool, was because we both got into hip hop or have been into hip hop from a certain era. Yeah. We had a lot more overlap.
That's so true. And, for our listeners may or may not have heard, but literally, Oscar and I in the 90s were in high school together, and literally we sat next to each other and we connected over two things, and it was Kung Fu movies and hip hop. So immediately we formed a connection and felt like we had a lot in common. And like, you're right, there's such a niche with, oh, wow, you like hip hop, because it wasn't so mainstream, right? It wasn't like you turn on the radio and all these songs were coming out. You need to get the mixtapes, right? All of that stuff. So what, kind of, growing up, because like you said, for us, like none of us are 50 yet. I think I'm the closest. So
close second.
I am definitely the closest. So 5 years short of that. But it's always been part of our life, right? So as far back as I remember, it was something I had been listening to, hearing, conscious about. I remember my first music videos that I would kind of like recall, like what kind of brought your, and I think we talked about this the first time you and I talked, what drew you to it? Like where was it where you fell in love, or, what kind of was the draw for you, Jason?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was, I trace it back to one convo that I had. So I had this buddy in high school, early in high school, my boy Youssef, and we were in class together, and we were just, talking before class started, and I was talking about how, honestly, I wasn't super into rap at the time because all I'd heard was, whatever on the radio. And he was like, no, man, trust me, I got some stuff that, you might really like. So I think like the next day he came back to school and he burned me 3 CDs. He burned me Jay-Z, The Blueprint 2. He burned me Deltron 3030 with Del the Funky Homo Sapien. And he burned me Labor Days by A$AP Rock. Right. So you've got like underground, super like psychedelic, like Bay Area stuff. Then you've got really abstract, lyrical, poetic, underground New York stuff. And then you've got, very commercial, mainstream New York rap. And so he was like, yo, listen to these. So I took those and I put them in my, at the time, obviously, like CD player. I put them in my Walkman and I listened to them like going back and forth from school on the bus for like a week or two or whatever. And I was like, man, this is just like really different and really unique. And it was something, I think what I loved then and what I still love now is that, hip hop was this portal like into another world. It was so thoroughly itself. And whether that was like fantasy, right? Like Deltron 3030, it's this like space opera almost of hip hop, with obviously, you've got Del the Funky Homo Sapien, who's actually Ice Cube's cousin, but his raps are very, very like sci-fi. But then you've also got like scratching on there with, I think, Qbert and maybe Dan the Automator, right? So it just brought me into a world that I knew nothing about, but it felt fully formed in and of itself, right? Just like any great art, I think you look at, a Salvador Dali painting, or you watch Star Wars, and it seems like there's this, it's a portal into a whole world that existed before you saw it and will keep existing after you leave. And that's what I thought was really compelling. And that's what first drew me into hip hop.
Well, thank you to Yusuf, because now we have, your creation and you continuing that legacy. So we love that. And I love that you just dated us by me talking about cassette tapes and you talking about CDs. So thanks a lot, Jason.
I was thinking the exact same thing.
I mean, CDs themselves, like,
I know.
That's dating also, yeah.
Whereas youngsters are going, what's CD?
Yeah, it's so nuts, right? We had to use, like, we used to have physically every album we wanted to take along.
And you opened it and you actually, in the same way that there's this memory of now I listen to a lot of audiobooks, but this memory of always going to the library and opening up books or buying a new book and selling it is the same when you CD or cassette, you first opened it and you look through and the
trifold.
How many folds, yeah. And what's funny is I don't know a lot of, I consider, of course, Jay-Z to me is one of the greatest of all time. Del the Funky Homo Sapien, the main reason I know him and I not researched, but I was like, let me listen to some of his stuff, is because I loved 93 Till Infinity by Souls of Mischief so much.
Yeah.
And they shouted out Del the Funky Homo Sapien. And I was like, what? I was like, I love this song, but who the hell is that? And then I listened to some of his stuff. It was a little bit out there for me, right? Because you kind of have that, like you said, that Bay Area type of rap. But it's interesting because to the point earlier, there's still this connection where I was like, oh yeah, The Blueprint 2, it's one of my favorite albums of all time. And then Del the Funky Homo Sapien, I don't know him, but I was like, but that's my connection is Souls of Mischief, which is funny. But
right, that's what I'm saying. Like, it's all this intertwined world. Yeah. And I was just like reading up on, and the more you get into it, like, I'm super into sneaker culture. And then you look into, like, whether that's Spike Lee and his connection to the Jordan brand, and then their connection to Looney Tunes. And, like, there's all of these through lines. It's just such a rich culture that I think rewards you for diving in more deeply, right? The more you want to learn and the more, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. The word is research, right? And not research in this kind of like domineering sense, but research in this sense of like, the more you dive into it, the more rewarding it is.
Yeah. And so what would that have been kind of for you? Because now Oscar is in it. He, born and raised in Brooklyn at a time where it's all happening kind of around you, even though you're on your own block. But what was that like for you? And like, what do you remember kind of hearing? Or was it just because that was what was on the block?
Yeah. What's the word? Ubiquitous, right? Where it's just everywhere.
Yeah.
But I will say that I don't think I really got into like where I would say I was passionate about hip hop music until maybe 92, 93, around there. But before that, when you think of it being in the periphery everywhere around you, I just have memories of going to parties and older cousins playing Run DMC and saying, "This is my shit. This is Run DMC. Listen to this." And me just being really young, but seeing that, or a cousin of mine. Well, my uncle married someone who has cousins in New Jersey, and in Brooklyn, we didn't have cable. And I remember we would visit them in New Jersey and see cable TV. I was like, what is this? And I remember seeing interviews of like Slick Rick, and I was like, wow. And so those are memories that I had as a young kid. But, when I think about, I was trying to think about this. What's the first like hip hop thing that I used to actually like rap? And I think I was in, my dad had a factory with his brothers, and me and my cousins were working there, and I started rapping Audio 2, Top Billin'.
Yeah.
MCMI, people call me Milk, and I remember being like, shh. And Marco, my older brother, would be like, Oscar, do that rhyme, because I had a pretty good memory. And so I would rap it, but just from memory, not because I was like trying to perform, just as a passionate thing. And I think I'm trying to think like, the trajectory just seems like it's just these waves, and the first album or cassette tape that I bought, I think I told you when we were in Miami, was EPMD, one of those, business never personal. I don't know, one of those things. And 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 as I was thinking about it afterwards, I was like, maybe I didn't even buy it. Maybe a friend of mine just was just like, here, have this. I was like, how would I have had money to buy it? I don't know. But it's like the first thing that I think that's the first hip hop album that I remember having as mine in my possession, and my mom coming in and listening to like the skits or a cursing goes, what do you listen to? Like that's just an early memory, but not a purchase,
Yeah, I don't know about a purchase, but I think just like Oscar, like especially growing up around family, your older cousins influence you a lot, like who you are around.
Oh, yeah.
And so I literally remember seeing the record for the Sugar Hill Gang record, right? Like my cousin had that. Like I remember seeing that, right? And so in my mind, like that's one of the earlier things I remember. Very much remember seeing, because I did have cable, so privilege. I did see, like all the Run DMC music videos and things like that. Like I remember tuning into Yo MTV Raps and having like that kind of growing up through my childhood. So I always had a draw to the music, and maybe because of my Caribbean background, it was just, kind of, it feels very, synergistic in a sense, but like, yeah, it's interesting because like you said, you had to kind of seek it out, right? You have to go get CDs or borrow CDs from people. And when things just come out, and like Oscar was mentioning, maybe you can't afford it, but there was so much value in also who you're getting it from, building relationships with people around you who would then kind of share in that. So it was a real share culture. I think it's so different now because you can go on iTunes and get whatever you want, whenever you want. And is it even called iTunes anymore? Or Apple Music?
I don't know.
Apple Music, Spotify. Yeah. But, I love that point, because this is something that I talk and think about a lot when it comes to like cultural appropriation versus cultural interchange.
Yeah.
Because I think that now it's very interesting, because we're at a time now where content is almost completely separated from the culture and community that created it. Right. And I think that it's really easy now to inadvertently, without even trying to culture vulture or to exploit, it's really easy to exploit cultures, because you can literally encounter a cultural product without ever touching in with or knowing or talking to or being around a single person that is part of the community that came from. Versus when we were coming up, it was a lot harder, right? Like Oscar, I remember we were talking about, mixtapes, right? Mixtapes were how we used to find all the new singles, or that was where the new hot, like album tracks would get leaked months before the albums came out.
DJ Clue with Jay-Z. That's how I first heard of Jay-Z. I was like, through a mixtape. Yep. What is this? Yeah.
Right. And to get that DJ Clue mixtape, you had to go to whatever. You had to go to the spot, or you had to go to the bootlegger, or you had to go to the street corner, and you'd run into people. It's like, the old Blockbuster Video days, right? When like you had to talk to, like, you get recommendations from someone. You go to the store, you didn't even know what you were going to watch. You just said, hey, I want to watch a cartoon tonight. I want to watch a rom-com tonight. And they'd tell you what was happening. Versus now, you never have to talk to a person. And I think that's the difference, is when we were coming up, hip hop was such you got to go to a place, you got to smell the smells, you got to shake hands with somebody, you're going to overhear some people talking about it. Versus what it is now is it's a lot more abstracted away. It's a lot more content focused than context focused, right?
Yeah, that's a really good point. Mimi and I talk about that Blockbuster experience a lot, because when we first were dating, that was a big thing for us. All right, let's go to Blockbuster. And we had our Blockbuster guy.
We had a guy, and we trusted that guy. We trusted
that guy implicitly. Then and we trusted some other dude that we read on who to recommend movies, right? And then he passed away, and we're like, how are we gonna know what's real? And the same, like it to me, I was thinking about like hip hop in general, and when I was first introduced to it, and still I'm pretty passionate about it, but really, when you're younger, you're really passionate without knowing context and without knowing that there's a gray, right? And so I immediately was like, no, I don't like that. Or I don't like that. No, that's not that good.
Yeah.
But the truth is that it all just depends on where you come from, what your influences are, what your environment is, all that but there's still, I mean, you grew up in the West Coast, right?
Right. So I want to have that.
But there's still this through line, like of things of like, oh yeah, that's right. I like that part. And this, it's a very interesting way to think about it.
Yeah. I mean, I actually came up in New England, so right. I was born in Chicago. Then I grew up in Delaware and Connecticut. Then I moved out here. But that is another interesting thing, is because I've been so multi-regional, like it's not like I've just been in, New York my whole life, or just in LA my whole life. And I think that is something that I think a lot about when it comes to hip hop, is how it's so interesting how the different regions all have their own culture, but it's all hip hop. Like in LA, so much of it is about the neighborhoods and is about the gangs and affiliations, versus in New York, it was more about boroughs, right? Which borough are you from? And
right.
Like Bronx and Brooklyn would have their friction, but they also, New York comes together, representing New York again. But then in another sense, it's all hip hop also, even as much as there's tension and distinction, there is still respect, and there is a sense of coming out of the same family tree, which has been so cool, because I do travel around a lot, and I do, just this summer, I've been in the Bay Area, I've been in LA, I've been in Florida, and I've been on the East Coast, and it's so cool to see that.
And do you feel, though, that in this day and age, it makes you sound so old when you say something like that, but it's better, right? Like the acceptance of, let's just respect what's happening. And like Oscar said, with time and age, we're not so territorial, like, no, only the Brooklyn, like the bridge is over, all that stuff. Like there's less about the battles. And, I don't know how old you were with the Biggie Tupac situation. Like Oscar was very, very dirt line in the sand at that time, being from Brooklyn, being New York, being the biggest Biggie fan ever. Like, it was such a hard time, I think, for hip hop. It was such a devastating time to lose all of these greats way too soon, but also maybe because I'm not tuned in, maybe I'm not tapped into the biggest beefs right now and what's happening. But it's like, is it like that now, or are people more like, no, let's just love the culture and the music, or are we like looking at a time that we've learned from, kind of thing, or is that still going on on the ground? Like I'm probably not ground kind of thing.
I think I'm out of it as well, because when I think we had this conversation, Jason, about drill hop, you know what I mean? Like, and I was like, that's not, man, these are people actually like committing felonies on the lyrics, and that's just, and it's not music that I listen to anymore. So I don't know, you probably speak better to that. I guess I'm not that invested in, does this person have beef with this person, except for one. And I'll just say it because I don't really care. I'm not a Drake fan. And I like that. I'm a huge Pusha T fan. And I like that Pusha T doesn't like Drake personally. But that's it. That's all I'm going to say about that.
That's funny. Yeah, I mean, that's the interesting thing too, though, right? Is that now there's a lot of different ways for like hip hop beef to go. Like back then, anything like Drake and Pusha T, it's not going to become a street situation. Right. Drake and Pusha T, no one's going to get. Those dudes are both too wealthy and too connected.
They're enjoying their money from what they're getting. They're not going to start shooting each other in the streets.
Exactly. They're just sparring, So I like that one's fun. That one's for the culture, I mean, there are like in this younger generation, there's actually a lot of street situations going on. But I do think what's different, right, is that in like 96, 97, right, you had pretty inarguably the two biggest artists, right, the biggest artists from each coast going at each other in a way that was it was on record, but it was also very messy. Street situations and other individuals were involved. There was a lot that was going on. People were getting stabbed, people were getting shot. And ultimately, tragically, both of them wound up losing their lives. Nowadays, you do still get a lot of that sort of friction. Obviously, Pop Smoke who was pretty much the biggest artist in New York, maybe the East Coast, certainly one of the top maybe 3 to 5 most promising artists in the country at the time. He got taken in LA, but there it was a little different because it wasn't like LA had beef with him. It was a robbery.
You just got robbed, yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, Pop
Yeah,
Smoke
it was
good.
a robbery that went really bad.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, his music is amazing. Like Pop Smoke, I still listen to his records.
Mm-hmm.
So I do think it's different in that hip hop's just bigger now, right? So you're right, like a Drake and a Pusha T, they're gonna be going at each other, and very clearly those guys don't like each other. But I love Pusha T. I love the clips. Word is that he and Malice are gonna have a new album coming out, so that's super exciting.
That is exciting.
Right, but at the same time, what's interesting, right? Drake doesn't really represent an area, right? Like, yes, he's Canadian, but
Toronto.
He's never. He does kind of represent Toronto, but never in a way like. And also, just representing your area is so different now, right? Like before, it was like again in 96, 97, it was very much no, the East Coast is better, or no, the West Coast is more like south. Like nowadays, I think nobody really plays that game. Everyone. Because the pie is so much bigger, right? Back then, like hip hop and visibility and the commerce of hip hop was so much smaller that, it really felt like even if you're a medium sized fish, you're in this small pond. Yeah. Versus now, like there's artists in Atlanta that will never break out of Atlanta and they'll do fine. They'll never break out of sort of like the Southeast region. And they'll do fine. They'll make some money. They'll invest their money. You don't have to go national. You don't have to be like top rapper in the country to like make a living. And I think that increased financial potential has relaxed the pressures for competition, right? There's so many different, you can be a singing rapper. You can be a pop rapper. Right. You can be in old school like bars and lyrics like a Griselda kind of rapper, and those are all completely different lanes, all under hip hop.
There's this video I saw a while back, and it was Method. It was like one of those YouTube things where it says Method Man rates new young city rappers, and I don't remember anyone that he saw, but all I remember him saying was, "How the hell did all these guys get so much money?" Like these young dudes are just flashing so much money and jewelry. And I think that's to your point, because there's just so much more opportunity to make money in a lot of different ways. Right. I mean, they could probably have I don't know if this was a few years ago, they could probably have a huge Instagram following and monetize that or something to that effect. Right. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. So just a little question just to think about towards the end of the podcast. I'd really like to hear, unless you have it right off the top of your head. I mean, I know I don't, but like, that first lyric set or song or something that's really made an impression on you, especially you as an artist, that you kind of stick with, that kind of resonates in your head, something that you hear and you'll never kind of forget kind of thing, just because it's meant so much to us in so many different ways. I mean, I know that Oscar and I have had this conversation so many times, like, do we love music because of the age we were at when we heard it, or was it really better at that time? And it's just when we listen to the hip hop and when we look at and hear documentaries on the history of hip hop and things like that, I mean, I do think we happen to be in a really special time in high school when some of the greatest were all coming out and when you had that dissonance, right? And so there's something to that sadness that was of us losing Biggie, losing Tupac, losing, people who were taking things to the streets. But at the same time, that competition is probably what just made everybody better, right? Like competition does bring about greatness. True? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So.
So we talk a lot about like, to Mimi's point, is it just that we're old? I don't know. It's a really tough question to answer because I think if you look at a generation older than us, like our parents, they probably say the same thing. No, music was better when we were growing up. And then, we've been on like cruise ships with like 80-year-olds and they're like, they don't make music like they did in the 50s, so I think there is something to that, because when you're a teenager full of hormones, evolutionarily, you're supposed to be breaking away from your family. Things matter so much, life and death. Like back then, I'm talking about thousands of years back then, but we still have that brain chemistry of these things matter so much that, I don't know, if you think about your first kiss ever, how much that moved you compared to the first like hip hop song that you loved, how much that moved you. And I think that's just so impressionable that, that you kind of think, well, yeah, it's not going to be the same. I don't know. That's the way that I think about it as far as the passion that I have for that era. But there's still some music now that I listen to that I'm like, this stuff is amazing. And I'm like listening to it over and over again. So I don't know. Yeah,
no, I'm very similar. Like I've realized that because, obviously for me as an active artist, like I got to stay tapped in, I got to keep my ear open, because the worst is when I think when you confuse your personal connection to music for like an absolute standard, and yeah, so I'm getting to that age certainly where I find myself when I'm just driving around in the car, like the stuff I tend to just, like the stuff you default to is the stuff that you love, right? Is the stuff that means something to you. And that can be, like, when you fell in love in high school, or man, when I moved away for college, and, I remember I was playing this song a lot my freshman year. And that's so precious. Questlove, in his autobiography, he talks about how there's certain songs that he doesn't like to hear now because he wants to preserve the memories and the attachments of what they meant to him when he first heard them. He's got this whole section about how if there's these songs that he loves and he doesn't want to create new associations of like, he's like, man, I want to remember, my first date with my high school girlfriend. I don't want to remember this smelly tour bus with a bunch of dudes, in my like early 30s. But yeah, so I do think that, there's clearly music that means a lot to me just because of who I was when I first heard it. And we're never going to get that back, right? It's rare that we're going to be like, and because where I really see this is when you go and sing karaoke. When you go and sing karaoke with people, you can really see what the music is that they feel most comfortable with, right? Because those are the songs that they sing in karaoke. And usually it's stuff I've noticed that it ties to about people's high school, maybe college years. And after 22, 23, you're not like, we can even hear a lot of new music, but it's rare that it really hits as deep as that music that when we were kids, right? Because that stuff just it's stuck in our brain chemistry and the way our brains are wired. But with all that said, I do, just like you're saying, Oscar, like there's a lot of really dope music now coming out of the genre of hip hop. I just think that it's shifted, like in the 90s, even to the early 2000s, like dope rap was characterized by lyrics, right? It was very, very much about the literal sense of what's being written, what's being said. Versus now, I would say rap has become more musical. There's a lot of melody in it. A lot of it, rap has always been about flow, but now really, I think like the flow and the melody and the delivery is really innovative. But lyrically, there's just less emphasis on really intricate, really, really
complex
literary writing. Yeah, poetic literary writing.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask you that because I know that Oscar has that tendency to like really love when he just goes, whoa, let me rewind that. Did you just hear what they said? Like how smart that is. And if you're not on the inside knowledge of maybe being on that street in Brooklyn and knowing what corner store was there, or knowing what food we're talking about, or if there are like a lot of Jamaican rappers and they always throw back to a lot of Jamaican food and stuff. Like if you don't know the patois, like, so there's so much clever writing and things like that. But so I was going to ask you about that, like lyrics versus just overall production and having the music, and, or is it just, no, this is just a great beat? Because then that becomes more of a, is it the producer type of thing? And then I guess, you know, back in the day it was your MC and your DJ. And then now you really just have your artist and then not so much a DJ, right? Am I right?
Yeah.
Work. You're active.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, like certainly, I mean, for the live performance, having like a good DJ is still absolutely crucial. And you go, you know, you look at like these new hip hop festivals like Rolling Loud, and still every artist that comes out going to have a DJ.
Okay.
The DJ is going to be very active on the microphone. Like you still definitely need that DJ holding it down behind you, you know? But yeah, I mean, to your point, I think that it's and I mean, it's unfair actually to say that to generalize even there maybe, because, you know, you'll get your artists like, you know, Pusha T is still one of the biggest artists in the genre. Like, you know, he's absolutely culturally relevant. And you look at somebody like a Griselda, or you look at, you know, like an Earl Sweatshirt who's still, or a Makami, you know, like there's these dudes that are still really active in that in that genre. You know, you look at like Central C from the UK, you know, arguably probably the biggest artist out of the UK right now. And he's dropping bars. So I think that I think that what it is, right, is that different, because hip hop is mainstream, right? At 50 years of hip hop is mainstream. Hip hop is pop culture. And what it is it's different subgenres of hip hop that keep rotating in and out of the current trend, right? So yeah, for the last couple of years, it's been drill. And before that, it was trap, right? And drill is very much in New York. And before that, the home of drill was London. And before that, it was Chicago. And then before drill was the most poppin' sound, right? You had trap music, which comes out of Atlanta, which has a long history in Atlanta. And then there's always this melodic pop rap, like a Juice WRLD, you know, Kid Laroi. And I think what's interesting is that obviously the subgenre of hip hop that's currently the chosen pop sound, obviously there will be like more exposure for that. But, you know, there's always people evolving and growing subgenres of hip hop, even when the spotlight isn't on it, right? Like that's how drill music came about. So the sound originated with like Young Chop and Chief Keef in Chicago, like, you know, 12 years ago. And then it had its run, and then, you know, it kind of died down. But then the UK picked it up, and producers in London like Axel Beats, they were making music in this genre. And it wasn't doing commercially well in the US, but in the UK it was picking up steam. And then you had these artists in Brooklyn who found these beats and felt affiliated with that genre. And so they reinterpreted it in their way. And then, you know, the last 2-3 years with Pop Smoke, with 5 Foreign, with Ice Spice, you know, Ice Spice comes out of drill, and Ice Spice is, again, arguably the biggest new artist in the last like year. So that's, I think, the really cool thing about hip hop is that hip hop moves seamlessly from underground to mainstream. You know, like you'll have these sort of like underground producers and rappers working on the sound, even though there's no chance of it charting on Billboard. And then a year later, you know, Ice Spice, you know, show with Taylor Swift, record with Taylor Swift, signed to Nicki Minaj. All of a sudden she pops out and drills back in prominence. And that's what I love about hip hop, is that it marries, like it always has this mainstream charting potential, but it never it's always grounded in something really underground and really grimy and really, those people who just made it without caring whether or not it would ever pop off. They just thought this was a cool sound to invest in. It had both at the same time,
Yeah, this is your MTV versus BET sounds. Like we were just like literally, like even just the quality of the video, the quality of the broadcast was different. It was just such a different feel. But I'm curious because you are a little bit younger than we are, and because you're an active artist, you haven't had to, but because you are who you are, you've done like what we call research. You've explored the different eras and 70s, 80s on. And so you're not just one of those artists that's like, oh, I'm going to listen to what's current. And that's that. Like when we've spoken to you, clearly, you guys have like heard a lot of the same things, some of it in real time. And then some of it where you're like, oh no, let me go back. Cause I like to dig and see what were the influences. And so what do you consider the greatest year of hip hop? Because I already know Oscar's answer. But
man, that's super hard. That's really difficult. Growing up, I would probably have said like 93, 94, right? Because you had Wu-Tang, and then Busta and Lita's The New School was active, and I really liked that era. But now I look back, I certainly think 2012 was a really excellent time, right? Because Kendrick came out, Cole and Drake, and you had all these like young superstars in the making. And I think at that time, right, rap was very lyrical. I think that might have been like sort of maybe the last era where like you have all of these artists that still felt very traditional rappers, like again, Kendrick, Cole, Drake. You even have like Wale, and
Wale's great.
I guess Cudi was kind of like heading in that new direction. But yeah, you still had all of these artists that were rooted in a very 90s, early 2000s kind of element. So I'd point at those two eras, like that early 90s and then that early 2010s to me.
Yeah,
what about y'all? Yeah.
For me, obviously, it's going to be 93, 94. You've got, even from the West Coast, you've got the Chronic. So, but
that's true.
Even the West Coast. Like, it was a long time before he could even admit how much it was like, no, it's good. And that's it. It's just good. And it doesn't matter that it's from the West Coast because his Brooklynness wouldn't allow it. But he has grown as a person and realizes like, no, now we can appreciate it because we long for the days where we feel that type of music what is nostalgic for us. Right. And so, but go on.
Yeah, that's true. I have grown, and I will admit that Ain't Nothing But a G Thing is an amazing song. But 93, 94 had, for me, when you look at it, and I don't know the exact order, right? But you have Wu-Tang, Nas, Biggie. You've got Tribe Called Quest at their peak. You've got so many. You've got Jeru the Damager, Black Moon. I don't know. It's just, it's to me, it's just, there were so many great albums, classic albums in one period for me, for my age, right? That it's hard for me to go back and find something that's similar. But to your point about 2012, and I think about this when I've heard, different experts always say, all right, name top five. It's a very popular question to ask, right? Give me your top five, right?
Of course.
But your top five matters only to you, right? And so if I was younger, my top five would have Rakim, Big Daddy Kane, Cool G Rap, KRS-One, right? If I was born in the West Side, I'd be like Ice Cube, Tupac. You know what I mean? If I was born in Atlanta, I would be like Andre 3000. All these people are amazing. If I was a little bit older, J. Cole, Kendrick Lamar, these guys would, if I was a little younger, right?
Yeah.
So, it's true. To your point, it's really a hard question to answer because it only means it's only the most important to you. And that's okay. And in the past, I used to be, to Mimi's point, No, that's wrong. I remember actually getting into a verbal, like, serious argument with this young girl about Biggie and Tupac, and me going, how dare you even compare Tupac to Biggie? Like, that like, to me,
angry.
Like, you're out of your mind.
Like, angry. Like, we had to have some serious, soul searching, like, look. First of all, you don't know either of these people personally, so you can't have agency, but like, it's okay to love different art. and
that did.
And you can love both.
You can love both. And unfortunately, I was old. I was late to mature to that type of thinking. I'll just admit it.
They had to be gone before you could come around to it. Yeah.
Listen, I'll be 100% honest, and this is controversial, but I don't listen to any Tupac songs, and it's just not my thing.
No, that's fine.
Right.
I get it.
Just because
I understand.
It's not hating.
It's not hating. I understand.
You're not hating.
I understand his place. I understand his place.
Now you're okay with that.
Yeah. But I don't think if ever a Tupac song comes on, I just skip it. But that's. I know some people are like probably think that's sacrilegious, right? But that's just for me, right? I'm like, it's just not my thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's what we're talking about, right? Because it's art. It is inherently subjective. But that's why, to me, I think the best top 5 dead or alive conversations are when you're a little more specific, right? Like when you're like, oh, who's top 5 lyricist, right? Or top 5 stage presence, or meant the most, did the most for him. Like you got to get like, because if you just say top 5 dead or alive, then it is very much who's yours, right? But like if you're a bunch of dudes in a barbershop in Brooklyn who grew up around the same era, then the conversation becomes more fun, because then instead of having this pool of like 5,000 artists, you're talking very specific. And I mean, I think those conversations are just a lot of fun, but you can't take them too serious. You can't take them like gospel truth, right? Because that's just bad for your health, for your blood pressure.
He's evolved a lot.
I don't anymore. I'm a very calm person, but
with hip hop, I mean, because this is a guy that any bit of money he would ever make and have was like comic books back in the day, but also The Source. Every new magazine of The Source, so you could see who got 5 mics or whatever.
Well, okay, so there was a Source was part of it, but I did spend a lot of money on CDs when I was at that age. And when you were talking about the CDs that you had, I was like, oh yeah, I think the first time my car got broken into and all my CDs were stolen, which happened more than once. Whoa. I remember the Blueprint Tree was one of those that got stolen.
Horrible. We lost so many good CDs.
But it's okay.
So sad.
That's why it's all on Apple Music now. It doesn't matter.
So sad. Yeah. So, well, as we wrap up, instead of the top 5, I'm still going to ask you the impressionable question. But like, I usually like to say like, okay, well, what song does remind you of high school, right? Because that's a very specific like era for you. And it's not necessarily your favorite, but like we've been asked this a lot. Or like what couple of songs? Because that's going to differ. It could differ. 4 years. Yeah, it's a 4-year thing. So as you ponder, my default is always the Wu-Tang Clan Ain't Nothing to Fuck With, and also Mobb Deep, Shook Ones. So that always those two.
Shook Ones Part 2.
Yeah, Shook Ones
interesting title.
Yeah, because no one cares about Shook Ones Part 1.
No,
it's all Part
2.
Yeah.
But he knew what I meant right away. You knew what I meant.
Yeah.
That's always where I go, and it's just my study music.
I tell you what, my high school music is right here.
Hey,
right there. Bam.
You had that ready.
I had that ready. I was like, we're going to talk about
preparation for this is prep work for the podcast.
Yeah, I'll just get that out. But Biggie Smalls, I would say, so
that'd be college for me, I think.
So I think about this as, okay, because you brought up a really good point. What are important parts of your life? And 94, I also moved out of Brooklyn to Orlando. And I as I think about it now, I probably was dying to hold on to something. Yeah. And so, Biggie Smalls being there was one, and hip hop music in general was another thing. It was like, oh, that's part of where I came from. Right. And so I think that's a big part of why that era, and that those years meant so much to me. But similar to Mimi, it's funny because high school, Shook Ones Part 2 came out in 95. We were juniors, and I remember that's the age where I didn't have a car, but I was able to hang out with friends who had cars, and that's what we rode around playing. Not just Shook Ones, but that entire album, over and over and over again. So that is a big one for sure.
That's a big one for sure. Yeah. Okay. How about you, Jason?
Yeah. Yeah. For me, I mean, the first one that comes to mind is What More Can I Say, right? Jay-Z. And and I think like specifically too, like the horns on that track, like just hearing that, like that really makes me think. I remember there was one summer, we were on a family vacation, and I just and my parents let me drive the car around when we were out. You know, we had this rental car. I think it was our car, and they let me drive around. And like, I've always had this schedule where like I like staying up at night, so I have these memories. Either I think we were in Virginia or in Florida, maybe. And it was like, 4 or 5 a.m. And, I was a teenager, right? But like driving around listening to that record, I've got this very distinct memory of that.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, honestly, I would say Eminem, like was, especially, that early to mid 2000s, just such a force. And, I think I'm fortunate, right, as somebody who's not Black, who's not Latino, to have an artist like Eminem, who also, like obviously he's white and I'm Asian, but who was in hip hop but wasn't Black or Latinx, but showed so much love and respect for the culture. And I think that this is something that, you can levy a lot of different questions and accusations at M, but I don't think you could ever say that he doesn't pay respect and he doesn't name and, look out for the culture and the ones who came before him. So I think that I was very fortunate to come up at a time when you've got this face of sort of mainstream pop rap who has so much of a love and an honoring of the ancestors and the OGs and pioneers of hip hop. And that, I think, taught me a lot about how to move as an MC, as an artist who loves the culture.
Yeah.
What's funny is we were talking about Eminem and you were mentioning how much fun he had. You could hear how much fun he had, especially in those earlier albums. And you saying that makes sense because when you did your performance in Miami, I was like, man, you're just having so much fun out there doing your song. And so I could see how that would resonate with you because as we get older, you hope that you could hold on to that sense of wonder and enjoyment and not there's some things that we probably are like make it too, what's the word? Mathematical, I think was your term, or technical or clinical. And it doesn't take away from the skill. The skill is still there, but that pure like enjoyment sometimes can be wrung out of it. Right. Which is kind of interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah. And that's definitely something that I always want to hold on to. And this is why I love, like honestly, in terms of money and income, there's a lot better ways to make money than to just be touring, like there's a lot of different ways to do that. But the most fun for me is still being on stage with a DJ, with a band, and having an audience and getting to perform the music. It's, it is something that I think can keep you youthful, that can keep you just like with the Kung Fu, right? Like, there's, y'all are both entrepreneurs, right? There's a lot of ways to invest your time that frankly will scale income better. But, if we can hold on to that pure joy of showing people the culture and showing people the work that we've put into it, that will keep us young. Right. That'll keep feeding us.
Yeah, 100%. And before we start to wrap up, so the first question, the question I wanted to kind of leave us with was was really like, especially because you have dissected music and it means so much to you and you've thought about it. Like, is there a lyric that has shaped who you are as an artist, or that sticks with you, or just one that you love, and then, or one that's been meaningful as you've kind of gone through the years and things like that, or a song in particular? Because I know for a fact that I'm not the greatest at memorizing lyrics. I will share, Oscar and I, going to college starting in 96, he would pick me up, and then we would I would have to have him train me in practice, and we would do all the Biggie Biggie songs on the way to the library and back. But specifically More Money, More Problems. And so that would be our karaoke song for sure, because that one we know.
Yeah, I would say it had to be some kind of Biggie song, like Warning. Warning to me is probably anything where it's a full story with like a kind of an ending. Like I think of Slick Rick's children's story or Warning, or things like that are they're so memorable because they paint a actual full story from a beginning to end. And those are, I guess, to me, are the most memorable. But as far as lyrics, there's just too many. I can't think of.
Yeah. What about you?
Yeah, I feel similarly. Like there's so many. Yeah. Like I'll say the ones that first come to mind, like Aesop Rock's Nightlight. That record was so interesting because I never heard someone, like his style of rhyming is very free associative. It's very, now I can see a parallels to jazz, but that was the first time that I heard something that was actually the opposite of what you're talking about, right? Like instead of being a very literal, very like telling you like, hey, here's a story or here's a point, like it was very abstract and it broke a lot of rules of literature, or, it was poetic in a really, really like sophisticated sense. And that really blew my mind. And then, what is it? Eminem's verse on, I forget which record it is, but he goes, "You're about to witness hip hop in its most purest, most rawest form, flow, almost flawless, most sawdust, most honest, known artist." And he just keeps going, like, and his flow on that, like, right, going back to what we were talking about, like, he's just clearly having so much fun finding a way to say what he wants to say in a way that sounds as flowy and bouncy as possible. That really gave me a sense of the joy that was possible with it. And then, then, Wu-Tang, Protect Your Neck, it's just so raw. Rakim had this record on the 8 Mile soundtrack. I think it was called the R, but yeah, like there's so many that I can think of. Again, it's almost like its own genre, right? Yeah. Lyrical versus storytelling versus flow versus music. But yeah, I certainly, when you ask that question, Mimi, there are distinct records that come to mind as like, man, this is the one that inspired me and soundtracked my life in certain ways.
Oh, yeah. I love that soundtrack. My life.
I think of I can't think of the lyrics, but one of the reasons why someone like Pusha T I love him so much, is we talked about this earlier, is his pronunciation and his elocution. Yeah. And he's there's so many like witty times where I'm like, he just went from like hopscotch to double dutch to toe tapping and is talking about, and put that all together. I was like, and I would go up to me and was like, listen to this. This is crazy. Yes. And right now there's that artist, to me, Toby Nwigwe. There's sometimes where I listen to the way he flows, and I'm like, even just simple stuff like flow nuts macadamia, just like little things where I was like, man, I like stuff like that where it doesn't have to be a story, but you're like, I like the way they put those things together. So there's still a lot of people having fun out there, which is really nice. Yeah.
Yeah, no, Pusha on his, I forget, it was this one record like 10 years ago. He said something about HOV lane it. And like Pusha, one of the masters of the double entendre for sure. because, obviously he's talking about Jay-Z, like, right? Hova, HOV, being in that HOV lane. But then he's also talking about like, HOV lane on the freeway. And I was just like, man, like it is so complex and so incredible. Yeah. Like, yeah, you just wonder, how can people think like this?
Yeah.
And they do it in a way that rhymes and fits. Yeah. It's so satisfying, right? It's like, those video clips on like IG, that the oddly satisfying, right? Like good hip hop lyricism, when it fits in, it's just so satisfying the way it clicks in.
To me, it reminds me of this amazing meal that we had when we were in Peru. Okay. And it was this combination of Japanese and Peruvian food. And every bite, you were just like, oh my gosh, how do they put this thing together? And sometimes hip hop music has that. And you get that feeling. And to your point earlier, it could be lyrics. It could be now with the melodic stuff, because Mimi was saying, hey, do you like Cardi B? And I was like, I don't know. Sometimes, man, I'd be jamming to Cardi B because it's just like, I'm just bouncing to it. And it may or may not be the lyrics. It may just be the way I like the way that her melody goes, So there's a lot to still take out of it, which is, even in our 40s, is kind of cool. Our 40s.
Yeah. There yet.
It's still kind of cool for me to listen to and go, oh, I can enjoy this. And also maybe someone who's really young can enjoy it too.
And we're like, we're young. We're young.
Well, I don't know. I don't think that, but maybe. I don't know.
No, I love it. I love it. And we'll have to pick this up again and talk more hip hop, just because, not just because it turned 50, just because this is so much fun. I want to talk about hip hop movies. I love having this conversation. I think it's just enriching for us selfishly. Like, yeah, let's talk to Jason.
This is just fun.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and what I'd love to hear more too is, obviously hip hop being so rooted in Jamaican and dancehall culture.
Yeah.
Like, I would love to hear how, you growing up with the family background you have, Absolutely. Like, what are the pieces that connect in, because it goes even deeper than hip hop, right? It goes back to other traditions, and Definitely. That's something that I'd love to pick up next time we get to chat.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, Oscar always goes, man, all of the really great rappers have a Jamaican background. And I'm like, yeah.
A ton of them. Actually, I think I told Mimi a while back, I was like, you need to like do a documentary on why Jamaica and hip hop are so closely related. Like, what is up?
Oh, yeah.
And I'm sure there's things that are done, but I agree. I find that fascinating. So we'll leave that to Mimi to do the research and have that answer for
sure.
Oh my gosh. It's always a pleasure, Jason. And having just saw you in person, even more amazing to be connected in this way. Appreciate you so much, your friendship, but sharing your knowledge, because knowledge reigns supreme over nearly everyone.
Hey,
I'm so proud right here.
All right. So until next time.
See y'all.
That's all for today's episode. Thanks for listening to the Sifu Mimi Chan Show. Please subscribe and rate my podcast on your platform of choice and leave a review. You can become a patron of the show at patreon.com/SifuMimiChan to help keep this podcast going. Follow me and interact on social media at Sifu Mimi Chan on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook.